In 1944, Japan came up with a strange and daring idea to attack America not with planes or ships, but with balloons. Picture mysterious shapes drifting silently across the vast Pacific Ocean, carried by the winds high above the clouds. At first glance, they looked harmless, almost peaceful. But hidden inside those balloons were deadly bombs, part of a secret Japanese plan to strike fear into the hearts of Americans thousands of miles away. What Japan didn't know was that this experiment would become one of its biggest mistakes, leading to consequences far beyond what they ever imagined. This is the untold story of how a simple balloon brought war to America's skies, and how the United States responded with unimaginable power. You're watching World Changers. Let's uncover this forgotten story. By late 1944, Japan's situation in the Pacific had grown desperate. Their navy was shattered, their air power weakened, and their once mighty empire was shrinking under constant American attacks. Japanese leaders knew they needed something, anything, to strike back at the United States and prove that Japan was still a force to be feared. That's when Japanese scientists discovered a powerful natural weapon, the jet stream. High above the Earth, this fast-moving river of air could carry objects thousands of miles across the ocean. It was invisible, unpredictable, and unstoppable. Japan decided to use it. They began creating large hydrogen-filled balloons that could rise into the jet stream and travel all the way to North America. Each balloon carried bombs and incendiary devices meant to explode on U.S. soil. The plan was simple but bold. Send thousands of these floating weapons toward America to start forest fires, destroy property, and most importantly, create panic among the American people. It was a plan born out of desperation, a last attempt to turn the tide of a war Japan was quickly losing. Between late 1944 and 1945, Japan launched an astonishing barrage of airborne weapons, roughly 9,000 hydrogen-filled balloons sent skyward, in the hope that the jet stream would carry them to North America. Each balloon was a clever, low-tech machine, a large paper envelope filled with hydrogen, a string of sandbags that acted as ballast to control altitude, and a timed release mechanism that dumped sand when the balloon sank so it could climb back into the jet stream. Attached to the rig were incendiary and explosive devices meant to ignite forests or damage property when they came down thousands of miles away. The balloons traveled an average of about 6,000 miles, drifting relentlessly over the Pacific with the wind. Reports began to trickle in from the U.S. West Coast. Strange, unexplained explosions, small fires in remote woods, and odd debris washing ashore. People and officials were puzzled. Sightings of paper lantern-like objects and scattered wreckage left the military scratching their heads and scrambling for answers. What was this new weapon? Where exactly were they coming from? The mystery deepened as more balloons crossed into North American airspace, turning what looked like a bizarre experiment into a real threat that the United States had to understand and respond to. In the spring of 1945, the war felt distant for most Americans. The Pacific battles were being fought thousands of miles away, and life in small U.S. towns carried on as normal. But on one quiet May afternoon, that sense of safety was shattered in the forests of southern Oregon. A young pastor named Archie Mitchell had driven with his pregnant wife, Elsie, and a group of 5 children from their Sunday school to enjoy a picnic near the mountains. The air was calm, the trees stood tall, and laughter echoed through the clearing as the group explored the woods. While Archie parked the car, Elsie and the children wandered ahead, curious about something they had spotted among the trees. It looked odd. A strange balloon-like object made of paper and metal tangled in the branches. None of them could have known it was a deadly weapon, one of Japan's Fugo balloon bombs that had traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific. Moments later, as they approached it, a violent explosion tore through the forest. Archie heard the blast from the car and ran toward the smoke, only to find his wife and all 5 children lifeless on the ground. The shock of that tragedy rippled through the small Oregon community. It was heartbreaking, senseless, and deeply personal. The war had suddenly come home. The U.S. government, which had been aware of the mysterious balloon attacks for months, had chosen to keep the information classified. Officials believed silence was the best defense, fearing that public awareness might help Japan gauge the success of their attacks or cause unnecessary fear among Americans. But after the deaths in Oregon, that secrecy felt unbearable. The truth had to be acknowledged. Across the nation, the story spread quietly but powerfully among military circles and government offices. For many, this single act, the loss of innocent lives on American soil, symbolized everything cruel about Japan's desperate tactics. It was no longer just about strange balloons or failed experiments. It was about revenge, justice, and bringing the war to a decisive end. The anger within the United States grew fierce. Soldiers who had already seen years of bloodshed now carried an even deeper resolve. To many, Japan's balloon bombs represented the ultimate insult, a cowardly attack against defenseless civilians. What Japan saw as a final attempt to show strength instead lit a spark of fury that would soon fuel one of the most destructive campaigns in military history. The message became clear. America would not forgive, and Japan would pay a terrible price for every innocent life lost. By 1945, the United States had become the most powerful industrial and military force on Earth. Its factories were running day and night, producing fleets of bombers, tanks, and ships that poured across the Pacific. Japan, on the other hand, was exhausted. Its navy was shattered, its cities vulnerable, and its people starving. Yet, even in this desperate situation, Japan refused to surrender. Every move it made, including the balloon bomb attacks, was an attempt to prove that it still had the power to strike fear into America. But that plan backfired completely. The United States did not respond with more balloons or symbolic gestures. Instead, it unleashed the full might of its military to bring Japan to its knees. From the vast airfields on islands like Tinian and Guam, formations of B-29 Superfortress bombers roared into the skies, each carrying tons of explosives. What began as strategic bombing of factories and military sites quickly turned into something far more devastating: the systematic destruction of Japan's cities. In March 1945, the firebombing of Tokyo marked one of the darkest nights in human history. Hundreds of American bombers swept over the city, dropping thousands of incendiary bombs. Within hours, Tokyo turned into a sea of flames. The intense heat melted steel, boiled rivers, and turned entire neighborhoods into ash. More than 100,000 people died that night. Men, women, and children, in one of the deadliest air raids ever carried out. The flames were so fierce that they created their own winds, sucking oxygen from the air and suffocating people before the fire even reached them. And Tokyo was only the beginning. One by one, other cities followed. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, each burned to the ground in the relentless wave of destruction. Factories that once built weapons for Japan's war machine were reduced to rubble. Entire communities vanished in smoke. For months, Japan's skies glowed red from the endless bombing. Yet still, its leaders refused to accept defeat. Then came the final blow. In August 1945, America deployed a weapon unlike any the world had ever seen. On August 6th, a single B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Within seconds, the city was consumed by a blinding flash and a firestorm hotter than the surface of the sun. Tens of thousands died instantly, and many more suffered from burns and radiation in the days that followed. 3 days later, another atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki, bringing even greater horror. The destruction was beyond imagination. The cities were gone, the sky filled with smoke, and Japan's will to fight was finally broken. The balloon bombs that Japan had once sent across the ocean to frighten America now seemed insignificant, almost childlike, compared to the scale of devastation that had come back upon their homeland. Japan's idea had been to bring the war to America's doorstep. But in the end, America brought war to Japan's skies, with a fury the world would never forget. What began as a desperate experiment with drifting balloons ended with the most destructive force in human history. The tragedy and irony of it all marked the final chapter of a war that had already taken millions of lives. A grim reminder that in war, every action, no matter how small, can set off a chain of events that ends in unimaginable devastation. When the war finally ended, Japan's balloon bomb campaign faded into obscurity. What had once been a bold and secret operation was now remembered as one of the strangest and most unsuccessful weapons ever used in history. Out of the 9,000 balloons that Japan had sent drifting across the Pacific, only a few hundred actually made it to North America, and even fewer caused any real harm. Most of them either exploded over the ocean, were destroyed by storms, or landed harmlessly in forests and deserts. In Japan's eyes, the project had failed to achieve its goal. It neither terrified the American public nor caused the widespread fires that scientists had hoped for. Yet beneath this failure lay a much deeper story. The very idea of launching balloon bombs revealed how desperate Japan had become in the final months of the war. Their navy was gone, their air force weakened, and their cities already being reduced to ashes by American bombers. With few options left, Japan turned to imagination and luck. The balloon bombs were a last gamble, an attempt to prove that Japan could still strike back, even if only symbolically. It was a sign that the war had reached a point where hope was more powerful than reason. For the Japanese scientists who designed them, the project was both an achievement and a heartbreak. They had discovered how to harness the jet stream, a powerful current of air that flows thousands of feet above the Earth, a phenomenon unknown to most of the world at the time. Their creation was technically brilliant, using simple materials like paper, glue, and sand to achieve something extraordinary, crossing the largest ocean on the planet without engines or pilots. But in the end, their scientific success became meaningless when it was used as a weapon of war. The very winds they studied to carry life and discovery were instead turned into carriers of death. Historians today still look at Japan's Fugo balloon bombs with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. They call it one of the most unusual weapon projects of World War II, a mix of ingenuity, desperation, and tragedy. The idea of waging war through the wind was something only a nation pushed to its breaking point could imagine. It stands as a reminder that even in the most advanced wars, human creativity can be twisted by desperation. But perhaps the most powerful lesson from this strange chapter of history is not about technology or strategy. It's about consequences. The balloons caused little damage compared to the devastation that followed. Yet their existence set off a chain of events that led to unimaginable destruction. A few drifting bombs meant to scare America instead helped fuel the anger and determination that brought Japan's downfall. The death of 6 innocent people in Oregon became a symbol of why the war had to end, no matter the cost. The story of the balloon bombs reminds us how fragile the line between action and consequence can be in times of war. What began as paper and gas floating silently across the sea ended with firestorms over Tokyo and mushroom clouds rising above Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It shows how war magnifies even the smallest decisions, turning them into forces that shape the destiny of nations. Today, the remains of a few of those balloon bombs still rest in museums or deep forests, silent relics of a time when the world was consumed by conflict. They no longer carry bombs, only lessons. Lessons about the futility of desperation, the price of pride, and the tragic truth that in war, even the wind can become a weapon. Japan's balloon bombs were a clever idea born from desperation, but their consequences were deeply tragic. What began as an experiment to frighten America ended up sealing Japan's own fate. A weapon meant to drift silently across the ocean carried with it a storm that would later return tenfold, consuming Japan in fire and destruction. The Fugo balloons showed that even the smallest and strangest acts in war can spiral into unimaginable devastation. In the end, a weapon carried by the wind brought a storm of fire upon its own creators. Thank you for watching WW2 Reels, where forgotten stories of war come alive, reminding us that even the quietest moments in history can echo louder than any explosion.